The Legacy of the Empire. Chapter 1 The Lost Letter. The sun rose over the port of Seville, painting the sails of the ships departing for the Mediterranean with gold. Among the shadows of the docks, a young man with dark hair and inquisitive eyes, Fernando de Valcázar, walked with a determined stride. His cloak barely revealed the sword that hung at his side, a memento of a father who had died too soon, leaving behind a legacy shrouded in secrets and ancient letters. Fernando was 19 years old, but an air of precocious maturity made him seem older. Today he had to deliver a crucial message to a Genoese merchant, a document that could change the fate of his family, and perhaps the entire empire. As he turned the corner of Arenal Street, a whisper made him stop. A hooded man emerged from the shadows, his gaze a mixture of cunning and menace. "Fernando de Valcázar?" the stranger asked, his voice grave. Fernando didn't answer immediately. His instincts told him this encounter wasn't a coincidence. With a swift movement, he hid the letter in the lining of his cloak. "It depends on who's asking," he finally replied. The man smiled disdainfully and produced a ring with a seal unfamiliar to Fernando. "Then you should know that not everyone around you is what they seem. Some are searching for this letter more ardently than any pirate on the high seas." Fernando paled. He knew the missive wasn't just a simple message. It contained the key to an ancestral secret, an inheritance his father had entrusted to him under oath, to protect the legacy, at all costs. Before he could react, the stranger vanished into the alleyways, as if he had never been there. Fernando was left alone, his heart pounding. He knew that, from that moment on, his life would never be the same. As he made his way to the port, he remembered his father's words. "Fernando, true power lies not in the sword nor in gold, but in the truth one keeps and the secret one protects." The breeze from the Guadalquivir caressed his face, carrying with it the scent of incense and damp wood. Each step brought him closer to an uncertain destiny, where allies and enemies could become indistinguishable, and where a single letter could unleash storms that would change the history of the empire. Fernando gazed at the horizon, and in his eyes was reflected the determination of someone about to enter a world of conspiracies, betrayals, and hidden power, a world that would challenge him to be more than a young nobleman, a protector of the empire's legacy. Chapter 2. Shadows over Seville. The city awoke to the ringing of bells and the cries of street vendors, while the sun, still shy, reflected on the rooftops damp with the early morning light. Seville was a labyrinth of voices and secrets. Spice merchants in the Plaza del Arenal, nobles arguing in courtyards about the next expedition to the Indies, and monks walking in silence, carrying manuscripts that spoke of ancient mysteries. Fernando advanced through the crowd with a firm step but a restless mind. Every corner seemed to watch him. Every shadow could conceal the man with the ring. Upon reaching the port, he spotted the Santa Clara, the very ship on which he was to embark for Lisbon. There, an old acquaintance awaited him, Don Rodrigo de Meneses, a naval captain, veteran of 1,000 battles, and a loyal friend of his late father. "You've finally arrived, lad," said Rodrigo, with a weary smile. "You have the face of someone carrying a burden he doesn't fully understand." Fernando nodded, still not revealing the existence of the letter. "There are things one doesn't choose, Captain. One can only fulfill them, or die trying." Rodrigo let out a harsh laugh. "That's how your father spoke when he still believed the empire could be sustained by faith and steel alone." As they boarded the ship, the sun was already breaking through the mist. The men hoisted the sails, and seagulls circled the river, heralding their departure. But in a corner of the dock, a figure watched silently, the same stranger with the ring, now accompanied by 2 other men in dark cloaks. Rodrigo leaned toward Fernando. "Don't look back, son. Sometimes danger feeds on our curiosity." Fernando obeyed, though a chill ran down his spine. The ship set sail, and Seville receded into the distance like a golden dream beginning to fade. Only then did he pull the letter from his cloak and hold it up to the light. The seal seemed to glow faintly, as if it held a life of its own. His father's words and the stranger's warning echoed in his mind. The legacy was underway. Chapter 3. The river's oath. The wind from the Guadalquivir filled the sails with a gentle force, and the ship began to glide along the current, leaving behind a trail of foam and nostalgia. Fernando looked one last time at the Giralda Tower, which was shrinking until it blended into the sky. He thought of his mother, of the morning prayers, of the smell of freshly baked bread that filled his house. Rodrigo, on the other hand, kept his gaze fixed on the horizon. He had sailed too many times to be seduced by the beauty of departure. He knew that each voyage was a test, and that each port could conceal a betrayal. The stranger on the shore didn't move. His companions, shrouded in black cloaks, disappeared into the mist. No one on the ship knew it, but their steps had already begun to weave the travelers' fates. "Father," Fernando finally said, "do you think we'll arrive before nightfall? If the winds are favorable," Rodrigo replied without taking his eyes off the helm. "But don't ask about the time, ask about the purpose." The young man frowned, not quite understanding. "The purpose?" "Yes," the captain answered. "Every voyage has one. Ours has not yet revealed its own." Then, the seal's gleam flickered again for an instant, barely visible in the dawn light. Rodrigo noticed it, and for the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his weathered face. The legacy was not only underway, it was awake. Chapter 4, Echoes of the Atlantic. The sun had barely risen over the port of Lisbon when the Santa Clara crossed the last currents of the Tagus. The morning mist enveloped the city's towers like a veil of mystery, and the church bells rang solemnly among the ochre rooftops. Fernando de Valcázar, standing on deck, felt that the wind carried more than just salt and dampness, a dark premonition, a silent voice from the sea that seemed to warn him. "We've arrived, Don Fernando," said Captain Rodrigo de Meneses, adjusting his sword belt. "But I don't like the air. Lisbon smells of danger when the Empire is silent." The young man nodded without replying. That trip, which should have been a simple family errand, had become a labyrinth of suspicion. The letter he carried, his father's legacy, remained intact inside the sealed chest, but it weighed on him as if it contained not words, but destinies. A man in gray robes awaited them at the dock, his face shrouded in shadow. He wore a barely visible gold badge on his lapel and spoke with a foreign accent. "Don Fernando de Valcázar," he asked, without fully raising his gaze. "The same. Are you an emissary of the Genoese Bartolomeo di Rossi?" The stranger lowered his eyes to the ground. "I was. But Mr. Di Rossi disappeared 3 nights ago. No one knows how or why. He left only this." From the folds of his cloak, he extracted a small medallion, engraved with the same symbol that sealed the letter. Fernando silently took it, noticing that the metal was warm, as if it had been touched by human hands just moments before. "Where did you find it?" he asked. "In the Flemish sailors' tavern, by the old port. Some swear they saw it board a ship bound for the Azores. Others say it was carried away by men dressed in black, without a coat of arms or flag." Captain Meneses cursed under his breath. "If the Genoese flees, the letter loses its destination." Fernando, without taking his eyes off the horizon, calmly replied, "Or perhaps it finds it. Sometimes the path reveals itself when one is lost." The wind blew harder, raising a whirlwind of sand and the smell of tar. Seagulls screeched on the masts, and the sound of the ocean mingled with the murmur of the city. At that moment, Fernando understood that the journey was not over. Another voyage had just begun, more uncertain and dangerous than the last. That night, while the captain slept, Fernando opened the chest. The wax seal gleamed in the lamplight, and a bluish ray swept through the room like a silent flash of lightning. On the surface of the paper, for a fleeting instant, letters appeared that had not been there before. They read, "Empire is not land nor crown. It is memory, and memory, if not guarded, perishes." The young man closed his eyes. He understood that the secret of the letter went beyond gold and power. It was something his father had wanted to preserve for times of oblivion, something he now had to discover, even if it cost him his life. And there, beyond the port, the waters of the Atlantic seemed to whisper his name. Chapter 5, The Islands of Silence. Dawn rose over a serene sea, with a silvery hue that seemed to stretch to infinity. The Santa Clara advanced slowly, pushed by unpredictable winds and a tide that seemed to breathe with a will of its own. Fernando de Valcázar remained on deck, his chart tucked under his shirt, watching the horizon deepen to an ever deeper blue. Rodrigo de Meneses, weathered by years and storms, kept his eyes fixed on the sky. "These waters hold secrets, son," he murmured, adjusting the rudder ropes. "They say maps fall apart here, and the compasses fell silent." Fernando smiled wearily. Perhaps that's the price of getting too close to the truth. For days they sailed through banks of fog. The nights were cold and the sea, unfathomably still. The sailors began to speak in hushed tones, afraid to utter the name of the islands they sought. The Azores, that cluster of lost lands where the wind seemed to speak in ancient tongues. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, a shout broke the silence. "Land ahoy!" Through the mist-rose-forested mountains, and a halo of light extended from the coast as if the very ground were ablaze. Rodrigo frowned. "That's not sunlight," he said. "It's human fire, or something worse." They anchored as night fell. The air smelled of sulfur and dampness. Fernando descended with Rodrigo and 3 other men, carrying a lamp and the Genoese's medallion. The island was enveloped in absolute silence. Neither birds, nor waves, nor insects broke the stillness. Only the murmur of the wind among the rocks seemed to guide them. In the center of the island, they found a circular stone structure, ancient, eroded by centuries. On the ground, engraved with almost mathematical precision, was repeated the symbol of the hourglass, the same one that adorned the letter and the medallion. Fernando bent down and ran his fingers over the stone. "Father, is this what you were looking for?" Rodrigo gazed at the sky, where the stars seemed to move with unnatural slowness. "If it is, lad, may God protect us. Here, time does not flow, it waits." Then, the letter on Fernando's chest began to vibrate gently. The wax cracked on its own, and a breath of ancient air rose from the parchment, as if it were breathing. The letters rearranged themselves before his eyes, forming new words, written in a calligraphy that belonged to no known century. "He who guards the legacy must hear the silence, for only in silence does the empire speak." The ground trembled. A deep, resonant sound emerged from the earth's depths. Rodrigo gripped his sword, but Fernando remained motionless, mesmerized. The central stone began to open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. "Shall we go in?" the captain asked. Fernando raised the lamp. "There is no return for those who seek the past," he replied. "Only the path to what must be remembered." And, with a firm step, he descended into the island's depths, where the empire's legacy awaited its awakening. Chapter 6: The Secrets of the Legacy. The staircase spiraled downwards, damp and narrow, as if the island itself wished to protect what lay within its depths. Fernando felt the air grow thicker with each step. A scent of damp earth and ancient history enveloped him. Rodrigo and the three men advanced behind him, swords drawn and torches raised, illuminating the moss-covered stone walls. "This doesn't seem like a simple hiding place," Rodrigo whispered. "More like a sanctuary of time." The words on the medallion echoed in Fernando's mind. "He who guards the legacy must hear the silence." He understood that it wasn't just about protecting objects or documents, but about listening, about perceiving what history had left hidden within the earth's memory. At the top of the stairs, a spacious hall opened before them. Columns carved with unfamiliar symbols supported the ceiling, and in the center, a marble pedestal held an ancient chest. The letter Fernando wore on his chest began to vibrate more intensely, as if responding to the object's proximity. Fernando approached slowly. Each step seemed to resonate in a different, drawn-out time, detached from the rhythm of the outside world. Upon opening the chest, he found not gold or jewels, but ancient manuscripts, maps, and a strange metallic artifact bearing the same symbol as the letter and the medallion. A meticulous mechanism of gears that turned without any apparent source of power. This is, Fernando stammered, unable to form words. Rodrigo, with his experience of 1,000 battles, observed him cautiously. "Don't underestimate what you've found, lad. What's here doesn't belong only to your family. It's a legacy that could change the course of the empire if it falls into the wrong hands." The artifact emitted a faint hum, and suddenly, the room was filled with light projections that depicted maps of secret routes, the names of conspirators, and documents that seemed to come from both past and future eras. Fernando understood that this was much more than a treasure. It was an archive of lost knowledge, guarded for generations by those who had grasped the importance of memory and truth. "We must take this to a safe place," Rodrigo said. "But first, we need to understand it." Fernando nodded. He knew his journey had only just begun. The empire's legacy wasn't just a family secret. It was an enigma that challenged the living and the dead, the world, history and time itself. As they ascended back to the surface, the moonlight illuminated the island, and Fernando gazed at the horizon. Each star seemed to point to a different path, each wave a hidden message. And, in his heart, he understood that protecting that legacy would not be just an adventure. It would be the ultimate test of his destiny. "The Empire speaks," he murmured to himself, "and I must listen." Chapter 7: The Council of Shadows. The morning mist covered the port like a gray blanket, and the ships gently swayed their moorings, oblivious to the tension that hung over the city. Fernando walked through narrow alleyways, aware that each step brought him closer to an encounter that would change his destiny. The letter and the medallion weighed more than usual, not because of their size, but because of the knowledge they contained and the responsibility they imposed upon him. Upon reaching the entrance of an old building, barely illuminated by a gas lamp, he was greeted by 3 hooded figures. Each one represented one of the houses that had secretly guarded fragments of the empire's legacy for generations. Their voices were low, resonant, and full of authority. Fernando de Alvarado, the first said. You have found what many feared was lost forever. The medallion has chosen well, but your heart will be the true test. What do you want from me? Fernando asked, with the mixture of respect and fear that such advice inspired. We want nothing you don't deserve, the second replied. But we do need you to understand what it means to bear the legacy. It's not just history, it's power, responsibility, and vision. The third figure approached and extended a hand toward the medallion. Fernando noticed that the sunlight, filtering through a high window, reflected the engraved symbols with an almost mystical glow. You must learn to listen, she continued. The voices of the past don't always speak in clear words. Sometimes, they hide in the music of clocks, in the wind that rustles through the battlements, in the silence of those who died defending the truth. Fernando nodded, understanding that this council was not just a formal meeting, it was an initiation. Every word, every gesture, seemed laden with centuries of knowledge and secrets. But where do I begin? He asked honestly. First, said the first figure, you must travel to the places that hold fragments of the legacy. Every city, every fortress, every secret library contains a piece of a puzzle that can save or destroy the empire, and you must do so without arousing suspicion. As they spoke, the mist over the port slowly dissipated, revealing a horizon full of possibilities and dangers. Fernando understood that the adventure had only just begun. He had to learn to discern friends from enemies, signs from traps, truth from deception. Before leaving, the figures gave him an ancient map, with barely perceptible routes and markings, and a small book with symbols that only an initiate could interpret. Remember, said the second figure, an empire is not measured by its armies or its conquests, but by the memory it leaves behind and by those who know how to listen to it. Fernando carefully packed the objects and walked away from the building, feeling the weight of his destiny and the force of the legacy that now coursed through his veins. Each step brought him closer to a world of shadows, intrigue, and secrets that only the brave could face. As the sun rose, illuminating the city rooftops, Fernando took a deep breath. He knew that this advice was only the beginning of a path that would test his courage, his intelligence, and his heart. And, for the first time, he understood the true magnitude of what it meant to bear the legacy of the empire. Chapter 8 The Forgotten Fortress. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the walls of the ancient fortress perched atop a cliff red. Fernando de Valcázar stepped off the ship cautiously, feeling the damp stone beneath his boots, worn smooth by centuries of wind and sea. Every murmur of the waves seemed to transport him to the past, to times when the fortress had witnessed oaths, betrayals, and secrets that he now had to unravel. Rodrigo de Meneses walked beside him, observing every corner of the structure with trained eyes. Son, he said gravely, more than documents or artifacts are kept here. Every wall, every room, holds its own memory. Pay attention, because what you seek is not always written. Sometimes it hides in the shadows and in the silences. Fernando nodded, the medallion hanging from his neck and the letter safely tucked under his cloak. They walked down a narrow corridor, barely illuminated by torches that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The echoes of their footsteps seemed to multiply, as if the fortress breathed with them. In the center of the main courtyard, a moss-covered well seemed to beckon its gaze. As he approached, he perceived a faint, almost imperceptible hum emanating from within. Without taking his eyes off the medallion, he recalled the words of the Shadow Council. An empire is not measured by its armies or its conquests, but by the memory it leaves behind and by those who know how to listen to it. Do you think this is what we seek? Fernando asked, with a mixture of anxiety and fascination. I don't know, Rodrigo replied, but I know that any answer will be accompanied by a test. Here, the legacy is not bestowed upon those unwilling to confront themselves. The young man took a deep breath and, with a decisive movement, lifted the well lid. Inside, in the dim light, gleamed a metallic object bearing the same symbol he had seen on the letter and the medallion. It was a small box adorned with inscriptions that seemed to move before his eyes. Each letter told a story. Each turn of the engraving seemed like a map to something even greater and more unknown. Fernando understood that this discovery was not the end of his search, but a new threshold, a step toward the deepest secrets of the empire his father had protected, and a challenge that would test everything he had learned, his courage, his ingenuity, and his ability to discern truth from lies. Come, said Rodrigo, holding his sword aloft. What's inside doesn't belong to you alone. It belongs to all those who know how to listen to the history of men and empires. Fernando nodded. With a firm gesture, he opened the box. ready to face the unknown, aware that the Empire's legacy was about to reveal its most dangerous and sublime phase. Chapter 9: The Box of Three Echoes. A red flash illuminated Fernando and Rodrigo's faces as the box lid opened. There was no explosion, no smoke, no sound whatsoever, only a faint pulse, like an ancient heartbeat awakening after centuries of silence. Inside, carefully fitted between metal plates engraved with arcane symbols, was a small cylinder of dark glass. Fernando took it cautiously. It was warm, as if it had been recently touched, as if it weren't an object, but a fragment of living memory. "Father," he whispered, "this is no ordinary artifact." Rodrigo tilted his head, inspecting the crystal. "No," he finally replied. "This is an echo, a trapped memory, sealed by those who mastered the knowledge of the Empire's voice. They used it to hold messages that could only be heard by those whose lineage bore the mark." He indicated the medallion on Fernando's chest. "You are the last to bear it." Fernando brought the crystal close to the medallion. Both objects vibrated, resonating with each other like two parts of the same secret. The cylinder projected a soft light, and a voice emerged from within. A voice neither male nor female, almost ethereal. "Whoever comes here must not fear the truth. This empire fell not by the force of its enemies, but by the shadow born in its own heart. Seek the chamber of judgment. There you will find the history that was hidden, and that many gave their lives to protect." The light faded. A heavy silence filled the room. Fernando felt a mixture of responsibility and fear stir within him. "The chamber of judgment," he repeated, almost voiceless. "It's at the end of the fortress," Rodrigo said, "beyond the inner courtyard and the underground stairs. But it won't be easy to reach. There are guardians, and trials that not everyone has passed." Fernando tucked the box and the cylinder into his cloak, clenching his fists. "I didn't come this far to turn back." Rodrigo smiled slightly. "I know, son. Now the hardest part begins." They both advanced toward the back of the courtyard. The shadows seemed to lengthen with each step, as if trying to hold them back. The wind blew strongly, heavy with ancient echoes. The legacy was beginning to awaken. Chapter 10: The Underground Chamber. The entrance to the subterranean chamber was an iron door whose surface was covered with circular markings, like ceremonial seals. Upon touching it, Fernando felt a chill pierce his skin, as if the door itself were a boundary between two eras. "Let me try," Rodrigo said. But as soon as he placed his hand on the metal, a spark repelled him, forcing him to step back. Fernando took a step forward. "It seems only I can open it." "Then do it," Rodrigo replied seriously, looking at his son as if he were seeing him, for the first time, as an equal. Fernando placed his right hand on the door. The medallion glowed, first dimly, then with increasing intensity. The markings on the door began to turn slowly, like forgotten gears coming back to life. A deep vibration coursed through the tunnel. The door gave way. A passageway spiraled down, lit only by fissures in the rock that shimmered with golden light. They walked in silence, listening to the echo of their footsteps blend with the sounds of the room. A distant murmur, like an ancient chant. Reaching the bottom, they found a circular chamber. In the center, 3 stone statues depicted hooded figures. Their hands held closed scrolls, and their faces, though motionless, seemed to observe them. Rodrigo gripped the hilt of his sword. Here those who sought the truth of the empire were judged. Sometimes they were acquitted, sometimes not. Fernando advanced, letting the light from the slits reflect on his medallion. The statues reacted, their stone hands opened, as if finally recognizing the air. From one of the scrolls came a voice that filled the chamber. 3 truths you must know. One about your lineage, one about your mission, and one about that which destroyed the empire. Fernando felt his heart race. Rodrigo stared at him, with a mixture of pride and concern. "Whatever it is," the young man said, "I'm ready." The voice continued. "But remember, knowing the truth also comes at a price. He who seeks, finds, and he who finds, changes." The floor trembled. The walls lit up with ancient symbols. The first statue began to fully unfurl its scroll, revealing an inscription that pulsed like a living heart. Fernando understood that nothing would ever be the same. The history of the empire, and that of his own blood, was about to be revealed. And what emerged from that room could change not only his destiny, but the destiny of all those who still lived under the shadow of that ancient power. Chapter 11: The Blood of the Legacy. The first statue finished unfurling its scroll. The letters, carved yet alive, seemed to move in the golden light that filled the room. Fernando felt the air grow thicker, almost electric. "Son," Rodrigo whispered, Whatever happens, remember that your worth doesn't depend on what that scroll says. Fernando swallowed and moved forward. The statue's voice resonated, deep as an ancient echo. The first truth is that of lineage. In your blood is preserved the memory of those who guarded the wisdom of the empire. But not all were guardians. Some were traitors. Fernando tensed. Rodrigo frowned. The statue continued. One of your ancestors, Hernán de Valcázar, broke the sacred oath. He sold secrets to those who later tried to destroy the kingdom, believing he was doing the right thing. His mistakes marked the beginning of its downfall. Fernando felt a blow to his chest. A mixture of guilt and confusion clouded his thoughts. Traitors, in our family, he murmured. Rodrigo placed his hand on his shoulder. What our ancestors did doesn't dictate who we are. What matters is what we do now. The voice continued. But there was also redemption. It was your father who restored the oath. And you, Fernando, are the last link in that line. The one who can heal the wound or repeat it. Fernando closed his eyes for a moment, controlling the trembling in his hands. The legacy wasn't just knowledge. It was a burden. I am prepared, he said finally. Whatever it is, I will face it. The lights in the room flickered. The first statue froze again, and the second began to unfurl its scroll. The trial continued. Chapter 12: The Hidden Mission. The second statue slowly unfurled its scroll, as if each inch revealed activated a new hidden mechanism in the room. The air grew colder, and a slight draft passed between Fernando and Rodrigo, as if an invisible presence had just awakened. The voice spoke. The second truth is that of your mission. You have not come to claim a throne or an inheritance. You have come to restore what was lost. Balance. Rodrigo lowered his gaze, understanding what this implied. Fernando, on the other hand, took a step forward. What balance? The statue replied. The empire fell because it forgot that strength without wisdom is destruction. Your mission is not to rebuild it, but to prevent its mistake from being repeated. You must bring its knowledge to those who today struggle between ambition and ignorance. Fernando felt a shudder. Such a mission was not a glorious destiny. It was a sacrifice. The medallion you wear is not a symbol of power, the voice continued, but a key. It opens the chamber of judgment, but it will also open doors in the hearts of those who must hear the truth. Rodrigo intervened. Son, this means there will be no rest. This goes beyond our family. Fernando nodded, his gaze fixed on the parchment. I always knew it, deep down, but I lacked confirmation. The voice concluded its message solemnly. Your mission is to remind the world that no empire falls suddenly. It falls when it ceases to listen to itself. And you must be the voice that reminds them of this. The second statue remained motionless, and then the third began to move. The final parchment emitted a dark glow, like a liquefied shadow. Rodrigo tensed. Fernando felt a cold vertigo. Father, he whispered, this will be the hardest truth. Rodrigo nodded. Yes, son, this will be the one that changes us forever. The room began to tremble. The final truth, the most feared, was about to be revealed. Chapter 13: The Forbidden Truth. The third statue finally awoke with a deep creak, as if 1,000 years of silence had been shattered at once. The dark glow of the parchment didn't illuminate the room. It darkened it, absorbing the torchlight until the flames became trembling shadows. Fernando felt that the ground beneath his feet was no longer solid stone but something alive, expectant. The voice, this time deeper, older than the previous two, spoke in a whisper that seemed to come from all directions at once. The third truth is the one that should never have been told. Rodrigo clenched his fist, trying to contain a trembling that he couldn't tell if it was fear or recognition. The statue continued. The empire didn't fall on its own. It was betrayed. Fernando took a step back. Betrayed? By whom? The answer was slow in coming. Not out of doubt, out of pain. By those sworn to protect him. A heavy silence descended upon the room. Suddenly, the distant echo of clanging metal resonated like a forgotten memory. Rodrigo felt the past catching up with him like a shadow one wishes never to have seen. Internal betrayal, he asked, his voice tense. Betrayal born of fear. Betrayal sealed by ancient pacts. Betrayal that still breathes. Fernando felt a chill run through his chest. Still breathes? You mean, that the descendants? The statue tilted its head slightly. The blood of the empire runs not only through those who wish to restore it, also through those who wish to bury it. Fernando looked at his father, seeking understanding. Rodrigo swallowed. He hadn't uttered that forbidden name in years. The Brotherhood of the Veil. The dark parchment vibrated as if it recognized the name. Fernando felt that every piece of his mission had just taken on a completely different meaning. It was no longer simply about delivering a message or opening an ancient chamber. It was about surviving those who preferred that the truth die with them. The voice pronounced the final sentence. The ultimate truth is not a warning. It is destiny. By revealing what has been lost, you will awaken what is hidden. And what is hidden always reclaims what is rightfully theirs. The three statues went dark simultaneously. The room fell silent. The final parchment dissolved into the air like black dust. Fernando closed his eyes. His mission had just begun. And it began, precisely, with those who were closest to him. Chapter 13 The Forbidden Truth. Continued. The air became unbreathable for a few seconds. Fernando opened his eyes only to discover that the room was no longer exactly the same. The wall seemed closer, as if the temple had decided to exhale after centuries of holding its breath. Rodrigo observed the place with a furrowed brow, calculating, as if assessing escape hatches that only a man with a past could recognize. We have to go, he said finally, without raising his voice too much. Fernando didn't answer. He stared at the exact spot where the parchment had disintegrated. He would have sworn that a few seconds before there had been dust suspended in the air. Now there was nothing. Not a physical trace. Not even a smell. But there was a presence. A consciousness. As if the message hadn't disappeared, but changed location. Father, he whispered, what do you know about that brotherhood? Rodrigo hesitated. It wasn't common to see him hesitate. He was a man accustomed to quick decisions, to long, calculated silences. This time, however, there was vulnerability. Not here, he replied, almost in a whisper, not with walls listening. A subtle vibration ran through the ground, like the hum of buried machinery. Fernando took a step toward the ladder, but stopped when he heard a noise that wasn't coming from them. A rustling sound, a gasp of breath. Rodrigo raised his hand, and they both waited. The torch cast long, distorted shadows that didn't quite match their movements. It was as if the light were negotiating with another presence to exist. We're not alone, Fernando said, though it was obvious. Rodrigo narrowed his eyes, alert to the darkness that surrounded them. No, he confirmed, his voice low and tense. And don't be alarmed by what I'm about to say, Fernando. The young man swallowed. Tell me. Rodrigo took a step forward, as if he wanted to place himself between his son and whatever it was that surrounded them. The most dangerous thing isn't what we heard. He paused. But who heard it with us? Before Fernando could answer, a sharp sound, like metal being drawn without a blade, resonated from the top of the stairs. Then, another directly behind them. Then, a third. The room was no longer silent. An unfamiliar voice, polite but hollow, as if mimicking humanity, spoke from the shadows. The Brotherhood of the Veil also guards the truth. One step, another, and it doesn't always allow. And those who discover it, return to tell the tale. Unified synopsis. The legacy of the Empire. The tension in the room grew almost palpably. What Fernando and Rodrigo had overheard was no longer the most dangerous thing. What was truly threatening was who else had heard it with them. Before they could react, a sharp sound broke the silence, first from the stairs, then behind them, and a third sound resonated with unsettling precision. An unfamiliar voice emerged from the shadows, polite and hollow, almost mimicking humanity. The Brotherhood of the Veil also guards the truth, and it doesn't always allow those who discover it to return to tell the tale. That instant set in motion immediate action. Fernando and Rodrigo tried to move cautiously, searching for exits and taking cover in the shadows. Every step they took was measured, but the threat of the Brotherhood kept them on edge, because they didn't know if the exit was safe. At the same time, a revelation emerged. From the shadows, a member of the Brotherhood whispered ambiguous words, sowing doubt and half-truths about Rodrigo's family. What seemed like useful information became confusing, and the protagonists understood that the danger was not only physical but also psychological. Finally, the cycle of escape and loss unfolded. They managed to leave the room, but at the cost of not knowing everything. Fragments of the truth remained behind, secrets that would haunt the reader and the protagonists chapter after chapter. The Brotherhood of the Veil was still there, silent and omnipresent, and the feeling that every decision would have as yet unknown consequences settled like a shadow over them. The legacy of the Empire. Escape scene. Fernando swallowed hard and crouched down next to his father, seeking shadows that would offer them cover. The voice of the Brotherhood still echoed in the air, hollow and menacing. They don't always allow those who discover the truth to return to tell the tale. They don't always allow those who discover the truth to return to tell the tale. Another footstep echoed on the wooden floor. Then another. The lamp's light flickered, projecting silhouettes that seemed to move of their own accord. Fernando felt his heart pound in his chest. Rodrigo squeezed his arm in a silent, warning gesture. "We have to move," Rodrigo whispered, stealthily, from the sides. Fernando nodded, and together they began to move forward, careful not to make a sound. Every shadow, every corner, seemed to harbor invisible eyes. When they reached the staircase leading to the side exit, a whisper behind them froze them. "Not everything you see is what it seems." It was the voice of the Brotherhood member who had left them with the half-truths. Rodrigo understood that the threat wasn't just physical. The revelations about his family could be used against him at any moment. Fernando reached the side door and slowly turned it. A beam of streetlight illuminated the scene. They finally saw an exit, but they didn't know if the danger was still with them. "Let's go," Rodrigo ordered, quickly, but without drawing attention. They stepped out into the fresh air, but just as they breathed a sigh of relief, a piece of paper fell from the ceiling in front of them. Fernando picked it up with trembling hands. It was a fragment of the Brotherhood's document, a warning, incomplete, unsettling, hinting at family secrets they hadn't known until now. "This," Fernando whispered. "This is just the beginning." Rodrigo nodded, staring at the shadows in the street. "Yes, and we must be prepared. Every step we take will count, and the Brotherhood of the Veil is still there, watching." As they ventured deeper into the darkness, the feeling that the true threat lay as much in what they knew as what they didn't know grew stronger. Night enveloped them, and with it, the certainty that this pursuit had only just begun. Fernando reached the side door and pushed it open cautiously. A faint glow, filtered through the streetlights, broke the gloom and traced trembling silhouettes on the walls. There it was, at last, a way out, a chance, a respite. "Let's go," Rodrigo ordered, quickly, but without drawing attention. The cool night air hit them like a bucket of reality. They had barely taken 2 steps when a metallic whisper echoed above their heads. Something fell from the roof and floated slowly to the ground. Fernando picked it up. It was a fragment of the Brotherhood's document, torn, yellowed, written in an old-fashioned script. Just a few lines, but enough to chill their blood. A warning, a familiar name, a date that none of them could ignore. "This," Fernando whispered, breathless. "This is just the beginning." Rodrigo looked at the silent street, where the darkness seemed to conceal invisible eyes. "And we must be prepared," he replied in a low voice, "because the Brotherhood of the Veil hasn't left. It's still nearby, watching." They walked without speaking, accompanied only by the sound of their footsteps. In the night, every shadow was suspicious, every corner a threat, and the unsettling certainty it dawned on them like a revelation. The danger wasn't just outside, it was also in their history, in what they thought they knew, and in what they were never told. The arrival, at Fernando's father's house. The house was dark. Only the living room clock ticked nervously, its sound echoing their own hearts. Fernando's father, Don Mateo, opened the door without turning on the light. "What are you doing here at this hour?" he asked as he ushered them in. Fernando placed the fragment of the document on the table. Don Mateo glanced at it for barely a second, but that second was enough. He took a step back. "I thought that was buried." Rodrigo crossed his arms. "Well, someone has unearthed it, and they're following us." The father remained silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Within the family, there were those who joined the Brotherhood, but also those who died opposing it. Look," he pointed to the fragment. "That date, it's your grandfather's birthday. Not by chance." Fernando felt a chill slowly rising from his stomach. "What does my grandfather have to do with this?" Don Mateo lowered his gaze. "More than I would have liked." The visit to the municipal archive. Search for hidden documents the next morning. With dark circles under their eyes and a determination to succeed, they went to the municipal archive. The old, silent building smelled of damp paper and forgotten records. An archivist, serious and distant, listened to their request and consulted the archive. "There's a file with that date," she explained, "but it's not registered. It's in the historical collection." She gave them gloves and a key. "Room 3, end of the corridor." Among gray files, they found a folder with no title, only a symbol, an inverted triangle crossed by a line, the same one that appeared in the Brotherhood document. The chance, or planned encounter just when you think you're starting to understand something. Leaving the archives, a man intercepted them on the street, a middle-aged man, wearing a long coat, hat, and gloves, even though it wasn't cold. Messrs. Aguirre and Ortega, he called them by their surnames. "You shouldn't dredge up the past. You might not like what you find." Rodrigo took a step forward. "Who are you?" The man smiled without joy. Let's just say, an observer, like everyone in the Brotherhood. Is the Brotherhood still active? Fernando asked. The man bowed his head. It never ceased to be. Some inherit money, others, land. You have inherited something more delicate, duties. Without saying goodbye, he walked away into the crowd. Fernando felt the air thicken. Duties, or threats, Rodrigo murmured. It makes no difference. But what I do know is this. Whether we like it or not, we have been called. And if they want answers, we will get them. The symbol that must not be named. The echo of footsteps faded as the figure disappeared into the crowd. Only the phrase remained, floating like thick smoke. You have inherited duties. Fernando didn't speak. Neither did Rodrigo. They walked in silence to the plaza, where the statue of the town's founder stood from its dark stone pedestal. It was a man with his gaze fixed on the horizon. At its base, a phrase worn by time. To guard the invisible is to preserve the essential. Rodrigo tilted his head. I've never read it. What's it supposed to mean? Fernando, distracted, traced with his fingertips the relief of the coat of arms engraved on one side. A circle divided into four, but one of the four quarters was slightly more sunken, as if it had been marked later, or erased. An old man sitting on a nearby bench watched them openly. When Fernando looked up, the old man awkwardly averted his gaze. Did you see it? Rodrigo asked. He didn't just see it, Fernando replied, lowering his voice. He was waiting for us to look, as if the man had heard despite the distance. He slowly stood up, leaning on a cane with an engraving identical to that of the coat of arms. He approached, unhurried, but with the determination of someone who wasn't improvising. The old man's voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. There are symbols that are inherited before surnames. Rodrigo felt a chill. Why are you telling us this? The old man's eyes narrowed, as if scrutinizing them. Because if you've been called, someone will have to teach you to listen. He turned away, but before walking off, he pointed at the statue with his cane. It all begins there, not with the name, but with what was erased. And he left without waiting for a reply. The silence returned, but now it was different. It wasn't an empty silence, but one full of warnings. Rodrigo broke the stillness. Fernando, what if that quarter of the shield isn't erased, but hidden? Fernando looked at the symbol again, this time not with inherited eyes, but with his own. Then, he said, we'll have to learn to see what no one else sees. The Guardians of Light 15 that night, the plaza was deserted except for the statue of the founder, which seemed to be observing them with a new, almost ironic, expression. Rodrigo ran his finger over the statue or the crevices of the symbol. This time he looked closely. There were microscopic strokes, lines that resembled veins, like branches or rays. This isn't decorative, he murmured. It's a map, or a diagram. Fernando didn't answer. He was looking toward the municipal library, an 18th century building whose Baroque facade was crowned by the same coat of arms, though more defined, more imposing. He remembered something. His grandfather had spent his last years there, organizing manuscripts donated by old families of the town. Tomorrow, Fernando said, that's where we start. The library's historic room smelled of wood, old dust, and leather. The librarian, a woman who spoke little but observed a great deal, watched them sign the register. We're looking for the founder's archives, Fernando explained. Correspondence, maps, property inventories. She nodded with an odd serenity. Upstairs, display cases at the back. But be careful what you open. Some documents were not written for untrained eyes. He didn't smile. He wasn't being ironic. He was warning. Rodrigo swallowed. In the central display case rested 3 leather-bound volumes. The oldest bore the symbol of the coat of arms, but with all 4 quarters complete. In the hidden quarter, barely visible, was a relief of a stylized sun, and, below it, a Latin inscription, Custodia Lucem, non gloriam, guard the light, not the glory. Rodrigo looked up. A religious order. Fernando shook his head gently. Not exactly. He opened the book with white gloves. The first thing he saw wasn't text, but a drawing. A subdivided circle, identical to the one on the coat of arms. In each quadrant, a word.
Observare, experir, rationare, servare.
Observe, experiment, reason. Keep. Rodrigo raised his eyebrows. This looks like a primitive scientific method. Fernando smiled slightly. Or a fragment of one. In the margin, written with a fine pen, a phrase clearly added later. Light is not taught, it is transmitted. And there, next to that note, was the signature. The librarian had said that the town's founder was a military man, a local politician. But that signature, without a doubt, belonged to another, much more unsettling name.
Benito y Revilla Mediana, Naturalist Society of Cádiz, 1782 pulgadas.
Rodrigo froze. Fernando, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Fernando closed the book carefully, like someone guarding a living secret. He wasn't just a founder. He was part of a scientific society, a forbidden one. At the back of the room, they thought they heard a faint creak, a muffled footstep. But when they turned, there was no one there, only shadows, and a very dim light filtering between the closed pages of the book, as if something inside still burned. The creak returned, this time clearer. A slight vibration ran through the shelves, as if the wood remembered something ancient. Fernando took a step forward. Rodrigo, on the other hand, instinctively stepped back. He wasn't just a founder, Fernando repeated in a low voice. He was a custodian. The pages of the book opened slightly, on their own, as if a current of air had passed between them. But there was no air inside, only a trembling light, as thin as a thread, that seemed to want to escape. Rodrigo swallowed. What were they guarding? The shadow at the back of the room seemed to have moved. Or perhaps it was the memory of a movement. The dimness was deceptive. Or a warning. Fernando touched the book with his fingertips. A shiver ran up his arm. A discovery, he said. Something that shouldn't have existed in its time. The word seemed to ignite an inner light, which grew brighter. They called it claritas, Fernando whispered. An energy, a kind of knowledge that illuminated consciousness, but could also destroy it. Rodrigo tensed. Destroy. They say that whoever understood it could see what lies behind reality, and not everyone could bear that clarity. The shadows closed in a little more around them. Fernando ran his hand over the open page. The ink seemed fresh, recent, impossible. Here is the document, he continued. The forbidden treatise they hid it to prevent it from falling into the hands of the other society, the one that wanted to use it without scruples. Rodrigo felt something like a heartbeat in the air, not from the book, from the entire room. And what does this have to do with us? He asked with difficulty. Fernando didn't answer right away. His gaze sank into the manuscript, into that light that seemed to have burned for centuries. Everything, he finally murmured, because we're both mentioned here, in a genealogy, in a list of heirs of the Claritas. A whisper swept through the room as if someone were walking behind them, invisible. Rodrigo jumped. Heirs? Us. Fernando nodded, with a mixture of fear and resignation. We're the last ones, and no one was supposed to find this. The light in the book flickered. The shadows took a step. The room seemed narrower than usual. It wasn't a physical change, but something in the atmosphere, a silent weight that clung to us, to the walls and to the gestures. Each person present arrived carrying their own weariness, with the feeling of having come a long way only to discover very little. The intuitions that had once seemed promising now appeared fragile, almost naive. Perhaps there is no drawing. Perhaps there never was, he added in a dry tone, as if he wanted to cut off any hope of meaning. The ensuing silence was not a respite, but a mute accusation. Each person felt, without admitting it, that the truth was near, but not to be understood, rather to turn against them. It was the uncomfortable feeling of moving toward a place where the answers don't illuminate, but instead reveal deeper fissures. Fernando, who had been observing for some time, finally spoke. Before, we thought the contradictions were fleeting, but perhaps we are the contradictions. No one answered him. It was an idea too uncomfortable to accept and too plausible to reject. Their eyes met with distrust, as if each face harbored something opaque, something the other shouldn't know. The convergence of perspectives, which on other occasions had brought enriching nuances, that afternoon only provoked confusion. Each contribution seemed to contradict the previous one, and each attempt at clarification opened a new space of uncertainty. The light of the setting sun entered through the window, weak, listless, as if it too were beginning to retreat. The atmosphere grew even denser, almost unbreathable. They felt that, instead of approaching the mystery, they were sinking into it without a compass or real company. And yet, no one dared to leave. There was a dark impulse that held them there, the suspicion that what they were about to discover wouldn't heal them, but rather fracture them a little more. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath their feet. Each shadow seemed to move with a life of its own, and the eyes of those present searched for explanations where there were none. It was as if the mystery itself breathed beside them, watching, gauging their fears and hesitations. We have to keep going, one of them whispered, his voice barely audible. We can't let fear control us. But moving forward wasn't easy. Each step toward the center of the room revealed forgotten objects, ancient documents, and relics that spoke of a past fraught with secrets and betrayals. The pieces of the Empire's legacy were there, scattered and silent, waiting to be understood. Meanwhile, a sense of vulnerability grew, the certainty that discovering the truth wouldn't be a relief, but a challenge that would test their inner strength. Yet, that very tension granted them a strange power, keen awareness, absolute concentration, and the willingness to confront the unknown with all their ingenuity and courage. Something was about to be revealed, and they all knew it. It wasn't just about history or relics, but an enigma that would touch their convictions, their relationships, and their perception of the world. Each breath was a bridge between the apparent safety and the hidden reality of the empire they had inherited, and none of them could foresee what price they would have to pay to uncover it. One of them, with trembling but determined hands, approached an old, dusty desk. Among yellowed papers and parchments, he found an envelope sealed with wax bearing a barely recognizable emblem, a double-headed eagle, symbol of power and vigilance. Breaking the seal, a message emerged, written in black ink and ancient calligraphy, which seemed almost to whisper secrets from centuries past. This could be the first clue, he murmured, as they drew closer, holding his breath. We must read it together. The message contained coordinates, forgotten names, and references to events that had been buried in the Empire's official history. Each word seemed to open doors to a secret past, and with each line read, the sense of danger and fascination grew. They understood that what they were about to discover would affect not only their understanding of the legacy, but also their own lives and future decisions. As they debated the meaning of each clue, one of them noticed a pattern. The references weren't random, but rather formed a hidden map, a guide that would lead them to the truth, but only if they were able to correctly interpret each sign. Tension mingled with excitement. They knew the path would be arduous and that every mistake could be irreversible. However, curiosity and determination were stronger than fear. With the message in hand and the first clue deciphered, the characters prepared for the next step, aware that the Empire's legacy was beginning to unfold before them, and that understanding it would require ingenuity, courage, and cooperation like never before. With the secret map unfolded at the table, the characters carefully plotted their route. Each coordinate seemed to lead them to forgotten places, hidden among ruins and vestiges of the Empire, places few had dared to explore. We have to stay alert, one of them said. Any mistake could cause us to lose our way completely. They set out at dawn, laden with equipment and ancient scrolls that might be useful for deciphering forgotten symbols and markings. The air was thick with mystery. Every shadow cast by the trees and every rock seemed to hold secrets of the past. Their first obstacle soon appeared, a crumbling stone bridge, hanging over an abyss that didn't appear on any map. The message spoke of a river that no longer existed in current records, but the ancient geography matched the coordinates. It seems impossible to cross, one murmured, as the stone creaked under his weight, but they remembered that the message contained not only coordinates, but also symbols that indicated the way forward. Each symbol on the scrolls corresponded to a solid stone, a safe place to stand. It was both a physical and intellectual puzzle. One had to correctly interpret the symbols, and the other had to guide them, step by step, carefully, following the patterns on the ancient map. They began to cross the bridge. Each step demanded concentration and mutual trust. One mistake could mean falling into the void and losing not only their lives but also the chance to decipher the Empire's legacy. When they reached the other side, their hearts pounded, and a mixture of relief and excitement washed over them. They had overcome their first challenge, but they knew this was only the beginning of a series of far more complex trials. If this is just the first obstacle, he said, glancing at the coordinates next, then the Empire really didn't want anyone to discover its secret easily. The sun rose over the ruins, illuminating what looked like an ancient path covered in symbols carved into the stone. The characters understood that the true test would not only be physical, but also mental and moral, and that every decision could reveal or block the Empire's legacy forever. The enigma of the lost inscriptions. After crossing the ruined bridge, the characters arrived at a half-ruined temple, covered in vines and centuries of dust. The entrance was blocked by a stone door with ancient inscriptions, symbols, and words in a language that seemed a mixture of known and forgotten tongues. This is, one murmured, eyes wide with astonishment. It's a coded message. We must decipher it to continue. The message engraved on the stone read, whoever seeks the legacy must unite the three elements, the sun that never dies, the river that returns, and the word that is never forgotten. What could it mean? Another asked. A historical riddle. They quickly began to analyze each phrase. They recalled the scrolls of the initial message, which mentioned forgotten events and places of the empire. The sun that never set seemed to refer to the central temple of the ancient empire, where the light always illuminated a circular mosaic. The returning river must be the riverbed that was now dry, but which once nourished the city. And the word that is never forgotten seemed to point to a key manuscript or inscription, preserved for generations. If we combine the three elements, perhaps the door will open, one of them said, excitedly. They followed the clues. First, they placed an ancient mirror over the circular mosaic of the sun, reflecting the light onto the symbols on the wall. Then, they traced the course of the ancient river in the sand, recreating its path on the threshold stone. Finally, they recited the oldest inscription they had found on the scrolls, the word that is never forgotten, with precision and reverence. A gentle tremor ran through the doorway, and the symbols began to glow with a warm light. Slowly, the stone shifted, revealing a secret passage that descended deep into the temple. We did it, one whispered, a mixture of excitement and awe in his voice. The empire has left its legacy for those who know how to observe, listen, and think. As they advanced through the passageway, they understood that each obstacle was designed not only to test their ingenuity but also to measure their determination, cooperation, and respect for history. The true challenge of the empire's legacy was just beginning. The empire's first secret, the passageway, spiraled downwards, illuminated by torches that seemed to ignite as they approached, as if the temple itself recognized the seekers. Every step was filled with mystery and anticipation. At the end of the tunnel, they reached a circular chamber, its walls covered in frescoes and reliefs that narrated the empire's history from its origins to its decline. But it wasn't just history. Each image was accompanied by coded symbols and hidden messages, intended only for, among those who could read between the lines. In the center of the room, a marble pedestal held an ancient chest, locked with a mechanism that combined runes, gears, and small metal magnets. An inscription on it read, "Only those who combine knowledge, courage, and heart will be able to reveal what the empire wished to keep forever." This is more than a treasure, one of them whispered. It is a legacy of wisdom, and perhaps also of responsibility. They began to examine the chest. Each gear required cooperation, each rune historical or symbolic knowledge, and each movement had to be made with precision and care. After several attempts, each contributing their skill, they managed to open it. Inside, they found an ancient parchment, illustrated with maps, diagrams, and notes about the empire, and a medallion with inscriptions that seemed to contain a secret coded message. The parchment revealed that the empire had been powerful not only because of its conquests, but also because of its ability to preserve universal knowledge and values, passing them on to those worthy of understanding them. "This will change our view of history," one said reverently. "It's not just about power, but about legacy and responsibility." As they held the medallion and read the scroll, they understood that the empire's legacy was not merely a material treasure, but a call to learn, protect, and apply wisdom in the modern world. Every clue, every symbol, and every challenge they had faced thus far had been preparation for this discovery. The temple seemed to vibrate around them, as if acknowledging that the seekers had passed the tests of ingenuity and heart, and that they could now grasp the true meaning of the empire's legacy. Interpreting the scroll as the temple light filtered through the tall windows, the seekers gathered around the open scroll on the central stone. Their eyes scanned the symbols, some familiar, others so strange they seemed to whisper in a forgotten language. They understood that reading was not enough. They had to understand, to decipher the intention trapped between lines and drawings, between ink and time. Each symbol is a principle, each stroke a piece of advice, one of them said, his voice trembling, as if speaking simultaneously to the others and to himself. "It's not a map of riches, but a manual of wisdom, a living legacy that demands action, not passive contemplation." Each interpretation opened new questions. What does it mean to protect knowledge in a world that seems to want to forget it? How can we apply this wisdom without corrupting it or subjecting it to petty interests? Are we ready to assume responsibilities that transcend our own existence? The group debated, discussed, and reflected for what seemed like hours, but could have been minutes. The sense of urgency was real, but so was the conviction that any hasty decision could undo everything they had learned. They understood that the true challenge of the legacy lay not in the discovery itself, but in how they lived it. Finally, one of them pointed out a detail that had previously gone unnoticed. a recurring symbol in the margins, a small circle that seemed to contain a bright dot. "This isn't just decoration," he said. "It's a reminder. Every action has a center, a purpose. We must find it and act accordingly." With that certainty, the seekers stood up, aware that every step they took from that moment on would define not only their own destiny, but also that of those who were still unaware of the Empire's legacy. The adventure of understanding now became an adventure of responsibility and decision, and each one had to choose how to contribute to making wisdom a living reality. The first decision. After hours of reflection, the group stopped before an obvious dilemma. The parchment mentioned a place where the ancient guardians had deposited forgotten knowledge, a secret archive containing instructions, inventions, and writings of incalculable value. However, the text clearly warned that access to this place should not be driven by personal ambition, but solely to apply wisdom with justice and prudence. "If we take this only for ourselves, we will destroy what has been entrusted to us," Fernando said firmly. "But if we share it with those who can use it for good, we will ensure that the legacy fulfills its purpose." Rodrigo, more pragmatic, frowned. "But how can we be sure who deserves to trust this knowledge? Who decides what is right and what is wrong?" The debate continued, but the parchment seemed to glow with a soft light, almost as if guiding their intuition. Finally, they found a principle in its ancient words: action must benefit the whole, not the individual. Thus, the decision became clear. Knowledge had to be protected and shared only with those who showed responsibility and respect, not with those who sought power or wealth. With this agreement, the seekers sealed their pact, each one committed to acting not out of self-interest, but for the greater good, aware that this first step would set the course for everything to come. The adventure ceased to be a simple discovery and became a mission of ethics and discernment, and the parchment transformed into a guide and silent judge of their future decisions. The temple, now silent, seemed to acknowledge the resolution. The light illuminated the symbols once more, and for the first time, the seekers felt they had grasped something deeper than any material wealth. The true legacy of the Empire lay not in what was kept, but in how knowledge was applied in the world. Applying the legacy upon leaving the temple, the seekers faced daily life with a different perspective. Every decision, every gesture, became conscious. Every interaction with others was imbued with the teachings contained on the scroll. They understood that protecting wisdom didn't mean isolating it, but rather bringing it to life through ethical and thoughtful actions. The first to act was the one who had hesitated the most in the previous debate. Applying the principles of the scroll, he helped resolve a seemingly intractable local conflict by listening attentively and tempering impulses, remembering that true power lies in prudence, not coercion. The results weren't immediate, but they were lasting. The parties began to collaborate, learning to value justice and fairness more than personal gain. The group's leader decided to dedicate time to teaching the village's youth about the importance of discernment and patience, transmitting the principles of the legacy without revealing secrets or formulas. In this way, wisdom spread silently but effectively, forming a small circle of people capable of understanding the responsibility that comes with knowledge. Other members of the group began to apply the ethics of the scroll to their professional and personal decisions. They didn't take shortcuts or exploit resources for personal gain. Instead, they chose paths that would generate a positive collective impact, even if it meant more effort and waiting. Every action, however small, became a reflection of the Empire's legacy, because it showed that true wealth lies not in possession, but in the correct use of knowledge. The scroll, always present in their memories, ceased to be a physical object and became a living principle that guided their thoughts, priorities, and daily conduct. The seekers understood that the Empire had not bequeathed material treasures, but a culture of responsibility, prudence, and wisdom, capable of transforming individuals and communities if applied with integrity. Conclusion: the true value of the legacy over time. The seekers understood that their adventure had changed something deeper than their individual destinies. It had transformed the way they saw, thought, and acted. The scroll was no longer a mysterious object, nor the temple a place of enigmas. Both had fulfilled their purpose by guiding those capable of understanding that the Empire's true legacy lies in wisdom put into action. Every decision made, every conflict resolved with prudence, and every lesson shared reflected the fundamental principle the ancients had inscribed. Knowledge is valuable only if applied with justice, patience, and responsibility. Material wealth can be lost, titles can vanish, empires can fall, but wisdom integrated into daily life endures and transforms. The seekers understood that the Empire had bequeathed something far greater than gold or jewels. it had bequeathed a conscious and ethical way of living, a testament to the fact that human intelligence is not measured by what one possesses, but by how one uses what one knows. Every action inspired by this principle was a small empire of justice, reflection, and care. In the end, as they gazed at the horizon from the temple walls, they felt that their mission did not end with the adventure, but began right there, in every day and every choice. The empire's legacy, therefore, became a constant call to live consciously, to apply wisdom, to protect what is valuable, and to transform the world through example. And with that certainty, the seekers began their return to the modern world, carrying with them not a tangible treasure, but the eternal inheritance of prudence, discernment, and responsibility, a legacy that, if cultivated, could never be lost. Author's endnote. The legacy of the empire is not intended to be a superficial adventure story or a guide to material treasures. It is not merely a book, but an invitation to understand that the true value of any historical heritage lies in the wisdom that is put into practice. The objects, symbols, and enigmas of the past only attain their meaning when they inspire responsible, prudent, and ethical decisions in those who discover them. Throughout these pages, the seekers have learned that protecting and applying knowledge demands reflection, patience, and discernment. Every choice, every gesture, and every shared teaching is part of a living legacy that transcends empires and centuries and finds its meaning in everyday action. If this work succeeds in making the reader contemplate the importance of acting consciously, valuing responsibility, and putting what one knows into practice, then it will have fulfilled its purpose. The legacy of the empire, ultimately, is not locked away in temples or scrolls, but in the way each person lives their wisdom and contributes to the common good.